to our colleagues from the East Coast, and good evening to our speaker from India. Thank you for joining because we have a great panel of 6 speakers. I'm going to start right away and move pretty quickly through our introduction. Welcome to our weekly Friday news briefing. I'm Sandy Close, Director of Ethnic Media Services. And today our focus is the drought, the worst in 1,200 years. What does this mean for residents of the state? How has California's agriculture-based economy fared? How will it fare during the water crisis? What impact does California's drought have on the rest of the United States? And what policies and innovations are other states and countries putting into place to mitigate their own water crises? We're honored to host an exceptional panel of 6 experts today to help us understand the global, national, and statewide implications of drought, and to discuss conservation and innovation in water management. Our speakers include Dr. Rajendra Shende, former director of the UN Environmental Program, who joins us from India, Heather Cooley of the Pacific Institute, James Knockbauer and Karina Herrera of the California State Water Resources Control Board, Shin DeGuzman of California's Department of Water Resources, and Professor Josue Medellin Ezra of the School of Engineering at UC Merced. In the interest of time, we will reserve all questions for the last 15 minutes of today's briefings. Speakers, please speak slowly as I'm doing for our interpreters in Spanish, Korean, and Mandarin. Reporters, please enter questions. This is such a unique opportunity, and if our speakers will monitor the questions in the chat throughout the briefing, any question you want to answer on the chat would be most welcome. We are live tweeting today's conference and live streaming it. We will send a video to all participants this afternoon, along with extended bios of our speakers, who are terrific sources for all of us as we move forward and deeper into the drought. Now, welcome Sunita Sarabji, our editor at EMS and a veteran journalist. Thank you for moderating today's briefing, Sunita.
Thank you so much, Sandy, and we'll start right away. Reporters, this week we are going to save our questions for the last 15 minutes of the briefing. So please put your questions in the chat box. Speakers, as Sandy mentioned, if you could answer questions in the chat box, please do feel free to do so. We start off with Rajendra Shende. Dr. Rajendra Shende joins us from India to discuss the global impact of the drought and what countries, especially India, are doing to mitigate their own crises. Dr. Shende, welcome.
Thank you very much. Sunita, first of all, thanks to your persuasive nature to get me to speak at 11:30 p.m. in India. But I'm particularly joining it mainly because I'm scared. Your title says, not a drop to drink. Well, that is scary. So I, in fact, was thinking how to start saying that I'm pleased to be invited or I'm happy to be here, because all these words don't mean knowing that there is a drought in California, which is never occurred in the last 1,200 years. So I'm going to stay as much as I can in this debate, even if it is late, just to see how the other speakers think. I have about less than 10 minutes to speak, and I'm trying to finish it within that time. So let me begin by saying some of the global things, then come to the regional things. Then I give some example of countries where the water stress is observed and the droughts are observed. But there are countries who are doing a good thing. And when you Google California, water solutions, lessons, and we always see what world can get a lesson from California as droughts. But there are examples where we can have a lessons for California from the other countries. And that's what I'm going to say, and probably end my talk by saying some of the suggestions which I feel are out of box, but I'm not sure whether the other speakers also think the same way. So let me start by saying that the problem which we are thinking is coming is now becoming a commonplace. 4 billion people, almost 65 to 70% of the world population, are experiencing severe water scarcity for at least 1 month each year. Over 2 billion people live in countries where the water supply is inadequate, and half of the world's population could be living in areas facing water scarcity by as early as 4 to 5 years from now. That's why the United Nations has this, what is called as a sustainable development goals, which encompass all these challenges. And particularly SDG 6 is related to clean water and sanitation. And there is another SDG 14, which talks about life below water. Of course, that particular SDG has no meaning if there is no water, because if there is no water, there is no life below water anyway. Let me tell you, there are about 33 UN agencies that are dealing with water directly or indirectly. You will be surprised. I mean, obviously, Food and Agriculture Organization, my previous organization, United Nations Environment Program, UNESCO, they all deal with the water in a different ways. FAO for agriculture, UNEP for ecosystems, UNESCO for education, etc. But there are some other agencies like WHO, which deals with the water in an indirect way, like waterborne diseases. ILO, International Labour Organization, it deals with the employment in the water sector and in the sanitation sector. So there is one agency which is called as delivery by as one, which is called as a UN Water. And that agency gets all these 33 agencies together and tries to deliver the program related to water as if with one voice. So that is a global scenario. Let me come to what is called as a water stressed regions on the earth. The Middle East and North Africa are the most water stressed region on the earth, which you can imagine. It's not difficult to guess why it is so. And I'm not definitely going into the reason for that. There are natural reasons for that. At the same time, there are other regions or other countries like India, some part of China, and even some part of Europe. They are undergoing water stressed areas, spots. And you probably know already, in Beijing, in Shanghai, there is a water problem. In India, the southern city of Chennai. In South Africa, there's a Cape Town. And there are a number of examples. Though the country may not be water stressed, but the specific spots are water sprays. And I think this is the scenario which is going to increase as we go along. But let me quickly come to some of the things which countries are doing. And let me start with some good things. We know that we had reports on IPBES, which is the science-based platform of International Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Eco-Services, which gave a very, very adverse scenario on what is going to happen. We had a few weeks back, IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, which talked about climate change and water impacts. So we are in really a gloomy scenario, is threatening. And it almost talks about the same as your title, that not a drop to drink. But there are some untapped opportunities. And let me start. Let me give you some specific example. In the region, which is a Middle East region, which I talked about, which is a water stress, there are examples where the countries are recycling the water more and more. And we have the example of Oman, the country in the Middle East, which is recycling about 78% of its water. Can you imagine that? And I understand, I think my Californian colleagues probably will correct me if I'm wrong, that California's reuse of water or recycling of water is about 10 to 15%. Imagine that with a Middle East country like Oman, 78%. In the Gulf Corporation Council, which consists of Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and United Arab Emirates, which includes Dubai, about 84% of the wastewater is collected. Doesn't mean that it is reused, but at least collected. And about 44% on average is reused. There are 17 extremely highly stressed countries. Are you able to hear me?
We are, Dr. Shinde, but I'm afraid we have to move on to our next speaker. You're planning to stay on to the end of the call. Could we come back to you?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank
you
so much.
Can I take a couple of minutes? Is that correct?
Well, if we could come back to you at the end of the briefing, that would be terrific, just to stay in our timeline. I apologize.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you again,
So
Dr. Shin.
I think there are some good examples for the California to take, and I will not extend it further. But let me give you some of the suggestions. And that's what I call it water smart culture. And I don't think that has come in California. I think the credibility of individuals to pay the income tax or to get the loan should be decided based on how much water that person is conserving or recycling. And with a smart technology, and we know Silicon Valley is in California, it should not be difficult to track the water footprint of individuals. And I feel if that kind of a thing California does, then probably even a Middle East can have some more lessons to take from California, and not only the lessons to give it to California. I stop here, Sunita.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shinde. I wanted to mention very briefly that in 2007, Dr. Shinde was one of several scientists with the IPCC to share the Nobel Peace Prize with Al Gore. So we are so honored to have you here today, and thank you so much for joining us. We move on next to Heather Cooley, who's the Director of Research at the Pacific Institute. Heather, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen, so just give me a second while I pull that up. Okay, are you seeing this okay? Great. Well, thank you so much, and I hope to build on some of the wonderful opening comments we just heard from Dr. Shinde. My name is Heather Cooley. I'm Director of Research with the Pacific Institute. The Pacific Institute is an independent, nonpartisan global water think tank. We were founded 35 years ago. We're based in California, but we have staff around the world. And our mission is to create and advance solutions to the world's most pressing water challenges. I will also say, in addition to that, we announced in 2020 an organizational goal to catalyze the transformation to water resilience in the face of climate change. And so a lot of our work is now sort of nested under this concept of water resilience and climate change. And you'll hear that sort of coming through in some of the comments I'm going to make. If you're interested in learning a bit more about how we're defining resilience, we developed a brief, which I show here in the slide, but I'd encourage you to look at our website for more information. So I want to talk a bit about drought in California and also in solutions. California is currently in the third year of a severe drought. Our reservoirs, our major reservoirs, are around 40% of their capacity. And a big issue is that our snowpack was much lower than is typical and is melting very quickly. In this middle graph, I'm showing sort of the average snowpack peaking in April. And here is the current year shown here in purple, where we had a lot of early snow and then really an extended dry period, about a 3-month dry period, and it's melting fast. That has created severe drought conditions, or contributed to the severe drought conditions that we've had. Currently, about 95% of the state is in severe drought or worse, and we'll expect these conditions again to intensify. We're now entering sort of our dry season, which will extend until about October of this year. And drought is not limited to California. In fact, this image is showing you the U.S. Drought Monitor, showing the range of areas facing drought in the United States. This is really a drought that's reaching across the Western United States, even into the Midwest and into the South. So drought is not certainly limited to California. A large swath of the United States and a large number of people are facing drought. And of course, as we've just heard, drought is not limited to the United States. It's an issue that all regions of the world face to varying degrees. We know too that climate change is already affecting Western water. Climate change has worsened severe drought in the West. A new study was just released in February of this year that shows that the past 22 years, really the period going back to 2000, has been the driest for the southwestern US, has been the driest in the past 1,200 years. This study also highlights the fact that this drought has been made worse by anthropogenic climate change. We know that droughts are longer, they're more severe, and they are more widespread due to climate change. And we are already seeing that here in the Western US. Unfortunately, our water systems and our planning do not yet account for this. And that is creating a major challenge for us and again, for many areas. California has made real progress and laudable progress in reducing water use and developing local water supplies. The graph here on the left is showing water use in California from 1960 through to about the present, or at least to the present for which we have data. The bottom line here shows urban use, agricultural use here in orange, and then total water use at the top. We see that about 80% of our water use is for agriculture in California. 20% is what's referred to as urban water use. But what we see is that since about the year 2000, we've seen a decline in water use, both for agriculture and in our urban areas. And that's really due to a number of shifts in our economy, but also to improvements in water use efficiency. We can see here, for example, for urban use, it peaked here in 2007 and has now declined fairly dramatically to its current level, which is about 6.6 million acre feet. We've also seen an increase in recycled water usage, a threefold increase since about 1970. So, but as noted, we're still not recycling as much as we could. We're recycling about 25% of the wastewater that we generate. So we've made improvements, but we still have a ways to go. Just last week, the Pacific Institute released a new study that quantified the potential for urban water efficiency, water reuse, and stormwater capture. We recognize that while we have made tremendous progress, more is needed in the face of climate change. We found, if we look here on the left, this shows the opportunities around efficiency, but by adopting existing technologies and practices, we could reduce urban water use in California by 30% to as much as 48%. We similarly find, with respect to water reuse, that we could nearly triple our water reuse generation. So a tremendous amount of recycled water opportunities still. And in addition, we don't know how much stormwater we're currently capturing. And by stormwater, I mean rainfall on sort of hardscape, on roofs, on roadways, urban runoff, as that's referred to. We are capturing some of that, but we find that we have significant opportunities to be capturing more stormwater. Even in dry years, stormwater could tremendously augment our water supplies, and in wet years, even more. So we've made progress, but we have more we can and must do. There are many best practice examples that can be found around the state, and as Dr. Shende noted, around the world. We can all be sharing information and tools and strategies, and I would argue we must be doing that in the face of climate change. But there are lots of opportunities. I won't get into them here today, but happy to talk about that offline or encourage you to look at some of our resources. So with that, if you're interested in learning more about our work, I'd encourage you to look at our website. All of the information we do is available for any media inquiries or questions, or there's contact here. But with that, I'd like to turn it over to the next speaker.
Thank you so much for joining us, Heather. I'm going to put your most recent report in the chat for reporters. We are next joined by James Knockbauer and Karina Herrera of the State Water Resources Control Board. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you. Let me share my screen.
There you go.
Okay. So can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, great. So hello. We are coming in from the State Water Resources Control Board, one of California's states dedicated to a single vision, the abundant clean water for human uses and environmental protection to sustain California's future. And so we've heard some context, so I won't go into it too much, but then mostly I'll be talking about the conservation as a California way of life framework. So we've heard from some of the speakers about the greater global and climate context of drought, and we'll continue to hear more. So I'll jump into California. California has a long history with drought, and there's a pattern in the states that major conservation legislation follows major droughts. During the last drought, the 2014 to 2017 drought, California set mandatory reductions targets for the first time in the state's history. And after the drought ended, the legislature passed Senate Bill 606 and Assembly Bill 1668, directing suppliers, farmers, and state agencies to make conservation a California way of life. So we find ourselves back in a drought, and California is currently taking two approaches: and immediate and long-term actions. So under immediate, we have executive orders and a drought state of emergency proclamation. It includes actions such as voluntarily asking people to reduce water use by 50%, through actions such as reducing your landscape irrigation, running dishwashers and washing machines when full. And then with the latest executive order, N722, the Water Board was directed to adopt an emergency regulation. So the State Water Board is currently working on that, and it will, cover urban water supply and demand assessments, level 2 shortage response actions, and defining and banning the irrigation of non-functional turf in the commercial, industrial, and industrial sector. However, as a long-term response to drought, we're making conservation as a California way of life. There's several reasons to make conservation a way of life. It protects beneficial uses, saves energy, and reduces carbon emissions. It allows regions to grow without increasing demand. And it's also one of the cheapest ways to bolster water supplies. So it's important to note that equity needs to be kept at the forefront of conservation. The majority of California's water suppliers are charging less per unit as customers are using more. So water conservation is affected by how water rates are structured. And then how do you drive forward efficiency so that everyone benefits from green outdoor spaces, not just necessarily those who can afford a larger lot. And then along with that, studies have found decreased urban tree canopy in disadvantaged communities across California. So how can water conservation support the growth and maintenance of our urban forests, particularly in communities with low urban canopy cover? And then last, if rebate programs are available, how are they marketed and how can we increase access? And while this conservation framework will not solve all of these issues, I think it's important that it not impede future work around this. So jumping into the framework, the two bills known as Making Conservation a California Way of Life established a new foundation for long-term improvements in water conservation and drought planning to adapt to climate change and the resulting longer and more intense droughts in California. The bills amended existing law to provide expanded and new authorities and requirements to enable permanent changes and actions for those purposes to improve the state's water future for generations to come. So since the bills passed, the Department of Water Resources and the State Water Board have been closely coordinating to carry out the actions. The department was directed to conduct studies and provide recommendations to the State Water Board, which we're expecting this spring. And the State Water Board was then directed to adopt new efficiency standards by the summer of 2022. And using these efficiency standards, each urban retail water supplier will begin calculating what's called an urban water use objective based on the water needed for the efficient use in their service area. Past critiques on conservation efforts in California have been that they're one size fits all, that they don't consider unique local conditions or past investments. as well as that more could be done to drive conservation more meaningfully and more equitably. And so this new framework is intended to be more tailored and very supplier specific. So here's a broad overview of what the objective would be. Urban retail water suppliers will calculate their objective based on efficiency standards on the efficient indoor residential water use, residential outdoor water use for commercial, industrial, and institutional landscapes with dedicated meters, as well as reachable amounts of system water loss, along with other unique local conditions, such as that include variances, and then a bonus incentive or credit for potable water reuse. And so suppliers will be meeting their overall water use objective, not individual standards, and how they get to that overall objective will sort of be a choose your own adventure. And last, I just wanted to say that this new framework for water conservation is also a great opportunity for us to partner with organizations and causes outside of water conservation. Starting in 2024, the suppliers will start calculating their own objective, and so potentially be looking at how best to increase water conservation and efficiency efforts within their service areas. It could include connecting with urban farms and partnering with their work around compost education, making sure that nurseries have low water using, drought tolerant native plants, and having customers be aware of that information easily, partnering with local tree organizations or conservation corps on the ground water conservation efforts, making sure that affordable housing development projects are mindful of how they're designing their outdoor spaces and what efficiency and appliance upgrades they're including, and then making that water energy nexus and making sure that climate resilience projects are also supporting water conservation. And I'll pass it on to you.
Thank you so much, Karina. Very welcome. James, were you going to make some additional remarks?
No, Karina did great. I'm looking forward to hearing more from everyone else.
Thank you again, Karina. We move on to Shin DeGuzman from the Department of Water Resources, who will discuss the impact of snowpack levels, one of the most significant indicators of drought. Shin, welcome.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Hopefully everyone can see just the slides and not the presenter view. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So my name is Shin DeGuzman. I am the manager of the Snow Surveys and Water Supply Forecasting Unit at the California Department of Water Resources. California snowpack is really important to the state of California because it provides roughly about 30% of our water every single year. With the majority of our population, state population living in Southern California, and the majority of the precipitation and snowfall falling in Northern California, that really kind of sets up basically a water challenge of how do we transport all this water and all the water that's falling in Northern California. And
Shin, just a little bit slower. I'm so sorry, our interpreter asked if you could speak just a little bit slower. Thank you.
No worries. But that's why our snowpack in California is so important. Looking at our snowpack over the last 70 plus years, so this is our snowpack record statewide based off of our snow courses. So we have roughly about 260 snow courses that are manually measured statewide by different cooperators of the California Cooperative Snow Surveys program. We take all that information, all that data, and compile it, and are able to compute a statewide percent of April 1 snowpack. That April 1 snowpack date is a very important date because in the Sierra Nevada, that is typically when our snowpack is at its peak each year. Looking at the record back to 1950, since then, 5 of the last five of the smallest snowpacks have happened in the last 15 years, with this current year, 2022, coming in as the 5th smallest snowpack on record. And we are seeing that decline in snowpack over the last 70+ years. Kind of echoing what Heather was just speaking about just a few minutes ago, based off of our snow water content, this is now based off of our automated snow sensor network that we break up into our northern, central, southern, and statewide regions. We're only roughly right around statewide, about 35% of average as of this morning, and 31% of the April 1 average on this date. You can start to see with the current line where our snowpack is, this darker blue line, roughly where our snowpack is for this year in comparison to some of the other dry years in recent memory. You can see here on the bottom right, that's actually an image of myself right around New Year's Eve, measuring at the same location at the Phillips Station Snow Course. I want to say I measured that on December 30th or 31st of 2021. And there I was right next to it on April 1st, when I was hoping to stand on average about about 5 feet of snow. Unfortunately, there was only a few patches of snow to actually measure. And places like Phillips Station Snow Course have been measured since 1941. A lot of our manual snow course measurements go back to the early 1900s. Looking at where our reservoirs are, so currently Shasta, Lake Shasta is our biggest reservoir in the state, which can hold up roughly about 4.5 million acre feet. And that is currently only about 39% full and only 47% of average to date. You can kind of see over the last 3 or so years, 3 to 4 years, roughly where we are in comparison to those years, and how much of that storm runoff we were able to capture from those October and December storms. You can actually see some of that snow melt, especially with the bottom graph here with Lake Oroville, right here in the kind of end of March, beginning of April timeframe, and even some of this runoff that we've actually captured here in the last week with some of the rainfall and snow. But still, we have a pretty big hole to fill with our reservoirs, only roughly about 70% of average to date statewide. Some of the impacts that we're looking at in terms of climate change for our snowpack, obviously with a warming climate, that's obviously going to we're going to start to get more rainfall in locations where we would expect to see snowfall. You would expect to see an increase in winter flood frequencies, which basically because now you're getting rainfall runoff, and that water is no longer being stored in the solid form as snow, and now you're having to actually operate to it right then and there once you get immediate rainfall runoff. And then, of course, you're going to get a lot of impacts to any kind of flood control reservoir operations. A lot of the reservoir operations are built off of operations and maintenance manuals that were developed decades ago. And obviously, we can't operate to what the climate was like decades ago, when obviously things have changed in really the last 20, 30 or so years. But I'll go ahead and end it there and pass it off to the next speaker.
Thank you so much, Sean. That was really good information. Our last speaker today is UC Merced professor, Dr. Josue Median Azuera. Dr. Azuera, I hope I pronounced your last name correctly. Welcome. Dr. Ezra is going to be speaking about the $1 billion hit to the California agricultural economy last year. Welcome, Dr. Ezra.
Can you see my screen?
And not yet.
Okay, so let me. Yep. Let me. Sorry. Yeah, it says that I'm not allowed to share. So, okay,
there
can
you
you
go.
hear it? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Okay, I'll put in a presentation mode here. I'm at UC Merced, the latest campus of the University of California, located in the heart of the Central Valley in California. And I'll talk about the economic impacts of drought. We're, as per the past presentations, we are in a whiplash weather in California, in which we have very dry periods followed by very wet years. We have this whiplash weather that is recognized in the peer review literature. You can see some of the incidents that happened in the year 2017, just after the 2012-2014 drought. And we can see from the last half of our last century that we have been having about roughly half of the years are wet, half of the years are dry. However, we see an increase in the temperature with respect to the historical average shown in the record. So managing for extremes, for warmer streams became the new normal. And this is something we have to deal with not only on for agriculture, but for cities and on environmental systems. So what was different in this ongoing drought? I'll be talking about the 2021 drought, but really this is the third year of drought we're at now. The map of the drought is different. Those areas that traditionally hold more water and that are able to provide water for cities and agriculture, and through a really vast network of aqueducts and pumping stations, reservoirs, and all that, were dry this year compared to the last droughts. Usually, the darker areas in the left in the map show the deficit in precipitation in the last drought, whereas in this drought, these areas were moved north, causing some stress in the system. Also, the chart on the bottom shows you here this 2020 and 2021 as the years with a higher evaporative demand. What does that mean? That means that we need to apply more water to crops in order to make them viable. And that is a result of very dry soil conditions and also a very thirsty atmosphere after a couple of years on the drought with warmer temperatures.
Dr. Ezra, could you click to move the slides because we're not seeing the slides?
Oh, okay.
There it is. Thank you.
Okay. So yeah, this is the slide, sorry. Can you see the next one?
Yes.
Okay, and these are the impacts of the drought. It's a summary of what we estimated happened during the last year. We had a shortage of about 5.5 million acre-foot of water that we were able to replace with increased groundwater pumping to make a net cutback of a 1.4 million acre-foot of water. That is about 6% of net shortage. Considering a drought of this magnitude, that is a relatively modest cutback in water use in agriculture, thanks again to the buffer that we have in groundwater in our system. And that resulted in about 400,000 acres of idle land out of our 6.7 or so in the studied areas, and caused about $1.1 billion in gross revenue losses due to drought and increased pumping costs, and roughly 45,000 jobs in the state. When we take into account the multiplier effects of that in the regional economies, these impacts climb to $1.7 billion and 14,365 jobs or so in the state. Unfortunately, many of these jobs belong to the lowest income groups in the state. And next slide, can you see that? so the next slide shows you some prospects for future droughts. Droughts are not going away. They are recurring events, and extreme climate is something we're going to see more frequently and more intensively in the future. So surface water cutbacks due to drought and to groundwater regulation will continue to limit supplies of water for agriculture. So, and also increase the irrigation requirements due to the dryness in the atmosphere and in the soil. The preceding conditions from previous drought will filter this gap between the water that is available and the water that is needed to grow crops. And that gap is often neglected. But droughts also bring, as our previous presentation, we saw some opportunities to improve. And one of the things we got from last drought was groundwater regulation. It was how to manage the resource sustainably over some time horizon to cope with future droughts. So demand management, meaning changing crops using deficit irrigation and idling land, can help to cope with future droughts. Use of natural infrastructure, such as managed aquifer recharge, just use this space that is in the aquifers of the Central Valley to cope with future droughts. And lastly is building system-wide flexibility, being able to do low environmental impact exchanges of water between users in regions to cope and reduce the economic cost of drought on that. And another one is land repurposing. And by that mean areas that are not, that have no secure water sources and that are unable to keep agriculture viable due to soil salinization and other conditions, can be transformed into habitat or managed aquifer recharge projects or solar panel facilities to fulfill commitments to lower emissions and at the same time to maintain economic vitality in the regions. And with that, I would like to leave my contact information and will be happy to follow up on any of this information. Sorry about the technical glitch at the beginning.
Thank you so much. I would like to start off with a question from you, and then we'll go to questions from reporters. We have a number of questions. I've been doing a number of stories on Yuba City and Sutter County, which has a large concentration of Punjabi fruit and nut farmers. And in 2018, I did a story about the fact that people were digging at least 700 to 800 feet to tap into water supplies. Is this going to be a trend that we consistently see? And what does that say about the state of agribusiness in California? Does this essentially spell the end of agribusiness if people are having to tap 700 to 800 feet with all the resilient problems of contaminated water supplies, et cetera?
Well, I can start by adding that agriculture is very creative and in the state and resilient and innovative, and always find some ways to overcome some of these hydrologic challenges. I don't think we're at a issue of food security. I think there's plenty of agricultural production in the state and to supply to places, but the permanent crops and bring some inflexibilities in the system in that have to be irrigated every year. So maintaining a healthy crop mix between permanent crops and annual crops that can serve as buffers during drought can help building this system-wide resilience.
Thank you so much. We will start with question and answers from reporters. Reporters, when I call on you, please identify your news organization. We will start with Henrietta Burrows of East Palo Alto Today. Henrietta, please ask your question and please identify which speaker you would like to respond.
Thanks so much, Sunita. Henrietta Burrows, as Sunita said, from East Palo Alto today. And I would like to address this question to any speaker who feels that he or she has the answer. We've heard that water shortages will cause mass migrations from areas of severe drought to areas that have more water, which will only put more demands on these areas. And we've been seeing these migrations happening already. So what is being done to address the current and upcoming migrations of people from drought-stricken areas to areas with more water that are also suffering from drought conditions?
Excellent question. Who would like to take that on?
We hear from Dr. Shende. That seems a very global question.
Yeah, I can just jump in, and I guess my short answer would be not enough. There were a couple of comments here in the chat noting and pointing to, some of the droughts in Central America, driving migration into the US, for example, and into other areas. And I don't think, I've seen some reporting on that, but I don't think it's widely connected or understood as drought and climate change as a driver. So I think there's a lot that needs to be done in terms of education around these issues. I think people tend not to think about the drivers. And I would say in terms of solutions, you've heard some tidbits around solutions, but I think one of these is helping, regions around the world to be more resilient to drought. And I think investing, for example, in supporting these areas is going to be critical and necessary to avoid or to, help to mitigate, I think, some of those migrations.
Thank you, Heather. Our next question comes from Araceli Martinez of La Opinión. Araceli, please ask your question and please identify which speaker you would like to ask the question of.
Hi, Sunita, thank you. I think Heather answered already my question, but I don't know if somebody else wants to add something. It's about the impact of the drought in big cities such as Los Angeles.
Absolutely.
I mean, I can also add on a little bit too, because it was hard to do that in the chat. But I guess just for others that maybe didn't see it, larger cities have tended to fare relatively well. Many have taken steps to reduce their demand and diversify their supplies. Droughts in many ways sort of highlight where the issues are, and we do often take steps to then correct some of them. And so, again, many of these regions have been experiencing drought going back throughout California's history. And so they have taken the steps. Where we have seen the biggest issues are in our rural areas and in our small communities. They typically don't have the types of resources available. They're dependent on a single source of water, in some cases groundwater. And as was talked about, one of the reasons that agriculture has limited the impacts in terms of the economic impacts is because they are relying more heavily on groundwater. That, of course, lowers the groundwater levels. And for those small communities and for those households that have those shallower wells, they are feeling the impacts. We are seeing an increase in household shortages, in particular for those dependent on wells. So there is a real inequity there. There are steps and efforts being made, but as a state, we will need to do far more for those smaller communities.
Our next question comes from Elena Kuznetsova. Elena, could you identify your news organization and the speaker that you would like to address your question?
Do you hear me?
Yes, we do. Thank you.
Thanks. Wonderful. So I guess Heather already replied my question early in her presentation because I asked just before I saw the presentation. So my general question was, what, in terms of water consuming, what activity has the largest impact? So as I understand, it's agriculture.
I think that's a good question for many of our speakers. Dr. Medellin Azuera, would you like to take that on?
Yeah, the impact of in terms of agriculture. Yeah, we're seeing shortages from surface water. So the main arteries that provide water to the agricultural areas in the state have to manage drought by issuing less than expected deliveries to the agricultural areas, and also limiting diversions from streams. And so the farming areas recur to groundwater pumping to do that. The problem is that the state has been doing that unsustainably. So there's about 10% of the water supply from agriculture, if not more, comes from overdrafting the aquifer, which, as many of you know, groundwater is no other thing than very old surface water that came from the sierras, from the snow melt, from river streams, and that has limits our ability to weather future droughts. So the Sustainable Groundwater Management Regulation of 2014 requires at a local level to organize agencies and plans to achieve the sustainability in recharge and pumping by year 2040. Whether the time horizon is not ideal, it provides a good framework that could be used in some other places that rely on agriculture. And this is intended to avoid many of the things Heather mentioned, such as the dry wells of for domestic use on the rural communities that are highly vulnerable to droughts. Not sure if I responded to your question.
Dr. Shende, can we bring you back into the conversation? How is India addressing its own water crises, especially in the realm of agriculture, which Elena just asked about? What are some of the innovations that you are seeing there? Dr. Shende, are you still with us?
Yes, unmute.
He has to unmute.
Yeah. Can you hear me that?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Yeah, thanks for asking that question, because that's where I wanted to say something and I was cut off at that point.
I'm so sorry. Please go on.
Number one, innovation is at the government level. There is a separate ministry for the water now. So it only focuses on water, is inequality in the regions, the rivers, lakes, water bodies, and the groundwater. And also the water coming from the sky, that is the rainwater, as well as the moisture, which can be condensed. So a lot of efforts are going on in India. But more than that, India wants to use its software power, and that's where the California's comparison comes there, in order to have specific water drops to each crop or each plant, that you have your sensors in a soil, try to see what nutrients are there, what salt percentages are there, and accordingly adjust the water drops falling over there. And this is what I call it as a water smart agriculture. A lot of efforts, a lot of startups are being done on this. That is a total innovation. Our Prime Minister Modi has said that water is a disruptive issue, and hence it requires a disruptive solutions. And instead of using our algorithms and coding in software, which is having some kind of a modern technology, start using it for the agricultural purposes. I still see, Sunita, while I hear the responses from the experts, that it looks like a lot of it is being done in California, but it's not enough. I think that kind of complacency may drive you to the real meaning of the situation, which your title says, not a drop to drink. A lot needs to be done in terms of innovation. And I did mention about creating what is called as water credits, based on which you can discuss your income tax based on which you can discuss about the loans or the debt that you can get from the banks. And when it starts pinching your stomach, then you will start recycling the water. Then you will start conserving the water. If you just say that we are doing, but not enough, I think that is going to be what is called as an invitation for the disaster.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Shinde. I see we are almost out of time, and I think there's one final question. As media, and this question is addressed to all of our speakers, as media, what can we do to help build awareness about the drought? And what can we as individuals also do? Let's start out with Karina. Karina?
Sure. I think it's important to drive the message that water conservation and water efficiency matters at all times, not just when we're in a drought. And as individuals, we can start with getting to know our water suppliers, how much we're using every month, looking at our water bill and trying to see where we can save, because it really matters household to household. Am I putting on too many loads of laundry, or is there anything I can do to fix my irrigation system? Just water the plants when I need to. So yeah.
Thank you so much. James, is there anything you would like to add?
No, those are great. Yeah, I think people getting a better understanding of how much water you're actually using is the great place to start. Yeah, when it comes to washing your clothes or washing your dishes, wash all your clothes, wash all your dishes, but try to run your dishwasher, your clothes washer when they're full, rather than running it, more frequently. And certainly look to your outdoor water use if you have any landscaping, like if you have a house with some landscaping or a yard. Across California, that's where a big fraction of the residential sector's water use goes, is to watering plants outside. And there are usually ways to be more efficient with that, including applying mulch or upgrading or fine-tuning your irrigation system slightly. But yeah, just being aware of how much water you're using and aware of the water situation in California, whether it's the snow level or the level of water in reservoirs. I think that's something we'd like to see people connecting more directly to.
Absolutely. Sean, would you like to add a comment?
Yeah, I'd like to just echo everyone from what everyone said, especially what Karina and James have said about what people can do. In terms of what media can do is follow the data, follow the science. Climate change is here. It's not something that we've been talking. We've been talking about this for decades, and here we are in 2022, and the winters are getting drier, the summers are getting hotter, and there's so much more that we can do. It's never quite enough, but it's something that we really need to tackle head on right now, because it's no longer talking about climate change in the future. It's here now, and we need to follow the science, follow the data, and just trust the scientists, the engineers, the researchers out there that this is the way things are moving.
Thank you. Dr. Shinde, any final remarks?
Well, I think enough has been said on this. I think what we require is extreme solutions and not the soft solution, knowing that California is successively getting into the third one. And apart from the soft power, as well as the agricultural power that California has, I feel that in terms of the education sector, it houses one of the best universities. And that university's potential should be summoned, not they are invited, but they is summoned to solve this kind of a crisis. And that would be one of the things. In India, you asked the question earlier, we are having a network of universities, which my organization is establishing. And if universities start exchanging the information related to the right kind of solutions to the water problem, I think you have the solution ready.
Thank you, Dr. Shande. Dr. Medellin Azuera, would you like to address this question? And then Heather will ask this question last.
Yeah, sure. I just want to say that we cannot make more water. That's a good thing, a message to bring. Building more reservoirs, building infrastructure will not make more water. We have plenty of space in our underground to store water. That's one. And believe me, opening the faucet in your households and getting clean water is a miracle. So we should be very conscious about our use, and just as James, Karina, and Sean says, being mindful about using the resource, because there's a finite amount, and media can help convey many of these messages and just help conserving our resources for the future generations. And happier day for everyone.
Oh, thank you. That's right. Heather, just to follow up on Josue's remarks, Josue had said that we cannot create more water, but there are communities that are doing things like desalination. Is that significant? And do you see that being employed significantly in our future?
Real quick, I mean, still we're reusing the same water. We're not creating more water. That water was going to go someplace else, but that has it works in areas in which there's no other alternative. It's very energy use intense, and we have to dispose properly of the brine to not create other effects. But you know, every tool helps a little. Just not starting by not using as much and being mindful about the finite nature of it, it helps.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'll just jump in on the desalination question, and then maybe on your second one. But we do have a long coast in California, so opportunities for seawater desalination, but it is expensive and it's energy intensive, and it harms the marine environment because of the intakes and then the discharge of brine. So there are other options we should be pursuing first, and you've heard them mentioned. Efficiency and reuse and stormwater capture are much cheaper, and they have a number of co-benefits associated with them. I will just touch on, though, your earlier point about the role of the media. I think it's hugely important. We saw during the last drought that a lot of the attention that the media put on these issues was one of the reasons we were successful in reducing our use and weathering that drought as well as we did. So I think the media's role is very critical. I think too, drawing attention to climate change is very important, as was mentioned, but the media can continuously do that. I think it's important people recognize and understand the role of climate change and the need for reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. The other thing I think the media can do is to highlight solutions, that this isn't just, this not just focus on the problems, but talk about the things we are doing and need to do much more of. And again, we talked about those, but happy to talk about that offline if folks want to talk some more. So I know we're at time, so I'll wrap it up there.
Thank you so much to all of our speakers. I turn it back to Sandy for final remarks.
At 8 minutes past the hour, you've given us more generous time, all of you, reporters and speakers, and especially to our Dr. Shande for weighing in and giving us such profound insights from a global perspective. Thank you so much, everybody.